Okay, designing beyond the pixel perfect idealistic case is my talk today. So I think a lot of you might have seen this small video. It was titled Devs Watching QA Test a Product.
What this rectangle? That one
also the square.
It goes in there too.
Yeah.
Up next, we've got this thin rectangle.
The thin rectangle.
You guess where that goes?
The thin rectangle.
That's right. It goes in the square hole. And up next, a cylinder.
The circle.
I think that goes in
the circle.
The square hole. Now, we've also got this semicircle right here. Do you see a slot that would fit
the semicircle?
Semicircle?
The semicircle.
That's right. It's the square hole.
So I really enjoyed this one, and that's why I wanted to share it with you. I think we could also title this something like Designing the Pixel Perfect Best Case Scenario Page and then Reality Happen. Real content, different browsers, and of course, real users. So let's talk about how could we bridge this gap between this kind of pixel perfect pictures that as designers we draw in our tool and the real deal, the real website, and between the developer and the designer team. The first thing I'm trying to do as a designer is to think and design beyond this kind of default state and design for scale. So usually you might think, okay, we come from a blank page and then automatically we have the final page loaded and that's it. So that would be the perfect case. Reality is actually quite messy when it comes to that kind of thing. It's not straightforward. Sometimes you have traps, you have pitfalls, you have errors, you have problems, you have data not coming, you have connection loss, things like that. And maybe your final perfect version might never happen. You might have too much content, not enough content, things like that. So there's a lot of other paths beyond this kind of perfect idealistic path. And when I think about the path between blank page and the final state, usually the first thing I might ask to my developer teams is, how is this going to load? And when I say how, I'm like, okay, people, I need to technically understand the constraints. I've been working on a lot of WordPress sites and it was quite straightforward because you have your PHP and then it sends the whole HTML to the browsers. That's done. Today, I work a lot with web application with a lot of JavaScript, and we have like services, API, REST services, things like that. So it's not as straightforward as anymore as we have this HTML sent to the browser and voila, magically. So once I've understood the technical constraint, I usually try to build this kind of loading flow. So it's basically a step-by-step flow of how the page will load for the users. I start with the last screen, so I actually start with the perfect condition, which is everything is loaded, and I work my way backward from there to the blank page. And of course, normally, if everything goes all right and it loads fast, users should not be aware of these different steps. But why I do that is that I really want to avoid to have this kind of blank page, user waiting for 5-10 seconds while having nothing on the screen, and then all of a sudden everything appears. Then sometimes I also have like loading problems at component level because something maybe takes time to respond or something. So this is also why I need to prepare kind of a loading state for my components. Then what happens if I have errors while it finished loading? So you want to avoid that kind of pages. And I still see those a lot on website and web, like the horrible, like bad requests and no one understands what's going on and users are scared and things like that. So usually the first type of errors I can have is at that page level. So here, for instance, what happened is that we were able to build a shell of the page, but the content didn't come because we had API issue, things like that. So at this point, I kind of need to tell the user, okay, it's not loading anymore and we have a problem. Unfortunately, on my web app, there's not a lot of things users can do except retry or reload the page. But sometimes you can give them information about how to come back from this problem or how to retrieve it. And then In my case, since we have an API that is going to load the content for each tile, and some content might come from different services and different API than the one we are working on, I might also have a content problem and loading errors from them. So then I also need this kind of loading error state at component level. Then there's errors that can happen with user interaction, and you need a design for those. And when I say design, I mean a good design, great copy, not something like that. This is a super bad example on every level. First, it's kind of blaming me as the users, like, please verify that we've entered the correct information for the following fields. Then I have to actually guess what is the following field that has an issue, like no field is marked, and you might have guessed the problem is with the accent in my name, because apparently only English characters are allowed. I'm like, what? So this is bad design, bad copy, bad user experience. Like, I'm sorry, but my name is correct. Your system is the issue here. So a few best practice when designing error messages we try to follow. First, we have to identify with the developer team all of those error cases. So what might happen? Usually you have this kind of error numbers, stuff like that. Why does it happen? It helps then maybe prevent it from happening or identify what people can do about it. Is it going to impact users? Sometimes we can have errors in the backend where it will never impact users in any way. So we don't really need to design for this. Can users do something about it? If so, you want to tell them, like, okay, how can you recover this error? Unfortunately, it's not always the case. If you have an API that's broken or something like that, it's a little bit more complicated. Then be consistent in the language you are using. If through the whole interface you're saying, my bookmarks, and all of a sudden the error message says your favorite, maybe some people will understand that favorite equals bookmarks, but why did you switch language? Like, try to be consistent on those so that people can really understand and identify the elements of the interface. And don't do like this horrible website, like don't blame users ever. It's not their fault. It's the system fault. So you need to try to find some kind of language, a voice and tone that always is kind of positive towards the user and say, oh, the system has a problem, things like that. Then the next state we tend to forget as designers is empty state, which is a little bit sad because actually empty state can be super interesting design opportunities. For instance, if you have a search that doesn't bring any result, you don't want to use the user, you don't want them to go to the website or something. So you might do like Martins, those here, they say, okay, you don't have any results, but you can have a few categories. We have our bestsellers. They try to give like alternatives to those no result pages. Also, it can be a fun and nice ways to do some personalization or something. This is the second example is a task manager app. So if you don't have any task, it's actually a good thing because it means that, yeah, you've done with your work today, something like that. So we try to give it a nice little touch like, oh, your all code app. I work in a super corporate environment, so this is as fun as it gets. But still, like, if you think about those inbox zeros, some of those mailboxes have this like, high five, you don't have any emails, things like that. So it can be interesting as a kind of a way to bring a little bit more emotional design and things like that. And then if the content is generated by the users and there's no content yet because they didn't generate any, it might be an interesting opportunity for onboarding. We can do a lot of super complex search in our website, and you can actually save those search because you have like a lot of filters and stuff. So if you arrive on my Save Search on your homepage the first time, you don't have anything there. So what we did, we put a little illustration and we explained to our users how they can have something there, which is like launch a search with different criteria, click the save, Then another thing is at component level. What happens if something is missing? How does my component scale down? For instance, if I don't have any image on this kind of cooking recipe preview, what do we do? Do we have a placeholder? Do we remove the image? It's not super complicated technically wise, but at some point my dev team need to be aware of that because they need to anticipate and build an HTML and CSS and JavaScript flexible enough to kind of take into account all of those different cases and all of those different design decisions. Then what happens if I don't have value yet for some of the content? If we go back to the cooking preview example, we decided to have some ratings. So we have these little stars, and like if you have a lot of ratings, then you have like 2, 3, 4, 5 stars. The issue is that if by default you don't put any stars because you don't have any votes, it might be less misleading for the user. Here they might think, okay, maybe there's no stars because it's not a good recipe. So maybe having like no stars at all is not a good solution until you have enough votes to actually have kind of a review for this recipe. So maybe another design solution is to change the component for that case and say, okay, we will put no ratings available and change it once we have some, or to remove the content altogether. But then they might wonder, like, is there a bug with this recipe and they don't display the stars and the rating? So again, this is like 3 different design solutions. I'm not saying that one is better than the other. Actually, the first one might not be a good idea. But again, it's the kind of stuff I need to think about as a designer. It's like, what will happen if some of the content don't have value yet? And the thing is, I don't need to design as in OpenSketch or Figma or whatever, all of those. I just need to decide what will happen at and when this happens, and at some point communicate this with my dev team. So what we are trying to do at the moment is we're building a design system. So this is the equivalent in the style guide. And I have all of those components in a really, really generic way, where we have all of those states, like loading states, error states, empty states. There's more states than that. And then on top of that, what we try to bring is a checklist for the Jira ticket that we are writing. So now for the new component, what will happen is like basically, I should not design all of those empty states again and again and just change the text. What we say is like use the empty states version of the component, and the text will be, there are no contracts, there are no, I don't know, documents to display, something like that. So we have a mix between super generic component specification and then a Jira ticket for the small little details. Another question that you might want to ask with your content when you're designing this is, how does it scale up? Like, okay, that looks nice with 5 elements. What happens if I only have 1? What happens if I have 10? What happens if I have 100? Do I have pagination? Do I have scroll? And if there's a lot, do I have lazy loading, things like that? So again, it's not super complicated, but it's things I need to think about when I'm designing these components, like far beyond the perfect, okay, 5 look nice, and let's just design that. Then what happened at component level if I have 2 lines in the title, for instance? Again, you might say, okay, then it will be just a little bit higher. That's nice, but what happens to the cropping of the image? And what do we do with the metadata on the right? Do we put them at the top? Do we vertically align them? Again, this is nothing technically complex, but at some point, my developer team will come to me and ask me about those things, like how is it going to scale up and what happens when you have more content than what you actually put in the mockups. And then what happened with my really, really nice list of cards that we love to design, this kind of card-based things when I have like content with different height. Do I have like a margin between the different content, and then it has the content, the tile has the content, the size of the content, or do I have like maybe a min height or something, or do I use masonry and then everything will just like be a little bit not perfectly in line and it's fine. So again, design decision to be taken at some point. And then how does my design work with other languages? So this is Slack. Mute video, flip camera, leave fits perfectly in English. Like, oh, you're so lucky because you have verbs that are so small. In French, not that much, because we don't have really one single verb to translate to mute. And if you use muter, it means to mutate, not to mute, so it doesn't work. So they actually translated this as désactiver les notifications, which is an error because they're like deactivate notification. You don't want to deactivate notification, you want to deactivate the sound. But you see the point, he's like, okay, works perfectly in English. Maybe in French, they need a design solution for that. Maybe you say, okay, you know what, the text is smaller and then it goes on 2 lines or something like that. So a few tips about scaling content and design decision. If you're using fake content, like I do, because I don't want to have real data in the mockups in case of a leak or something, make sure that the structure is close to the real one. If you're a designer, just like ask your developer team about the limits of those fields, but also ask for minimum, maximum, and average content length. If you have like a limit of 1,000 characters in the database, but most of the stuff only have like 75 characters or 75 words. Then maybe you design for the average, and then you have another design solution for the maximum or minimum limit, things like that. And if you're a developer, if something is missing, you can always ask the designer. We are usually trying to do our best, but we can't imagine everything that's going on in the backend and things like that. So usually what we have is this kind of meeting where we show the mockups to the developer, and then we discuss about, oh, but what might happen here and things like that. So it's really kind of a super huge collaborative effort. Then for translation, try to know upfront if you're going to have other languages and plan accordingly. Also, you should know there's ratio of translation where you say, okay, usually if you translate from English to French, it's going to be, I don't remember the ratio, but like, let's say 1.5 longer. So maybe you can kind of prepare for that. Last but not least, I also need to think about different interaction states, not just the default one. So usually the most obvious one is like, okay, you need to have kind of a hover effect. Hover state for any components. But there's more like, what about active states, but also like focus for keyboard navigation. And then let's not forget about users who can't interact with an element because it's disabled. Those need to be designed as well. So usually what we do, so that developer don't have to go through 100 mockups to try to find the different states, is we are going to have a specific page in our design system that will document all of those small little states, so that when they build a component, they know exactly how it's supposed to behave. Then what about keyboard usage specifically? Like, some people might not be in a situation when they're using a mouse. They might be navigating your interface only through keyboard navigation. So for accessibility purpose, at some point, you need to also prepare your component to work with keyboard navigation. And this is usually something that needs to be designed as well. And in my usability testing, I also discovered that a lot of expert users actually like keyboard navigation. Like, we had this super complex form for people who were doing truck transportation management. And they said, I don't want to use a mouse. I have to fill this form like 50 times a day or more. I always fill all the information, and I'm super fast with the keyboard navigation. It's like entry tab, entry tab, entry tab, super fast. So they said, we actually don't want to use the mouse here. You need to provide a solution for keyboard navigation. So at some point, I need to also think, when I'm thinking about scaling my design, how is it going to work beyond the usually classic mouse use for other kind of input and devices. And then there's such uses. One of my friends was redesigning their portfolio, and they wanted an icon-only based navigation because it looked kind of fancy and nice at that point. And then I asked, yeah, but your icons are quite complex, so what happens if people don't understand them? And they say, we have a tooltip then. It's like, yeah, okay, but what about touch users? Because what happens with touch is that if you have an element plus, when you touch it and it has an over effect, you might see the over effect, like, so the tooltip for half a second or something, and then it's gone, and then the new page opens. So it's kind of a quite clumsy experience for touch users. So we said, you know what, maybe just put the label next to the icons. And this is what a lot of people have been doing so far, is like, it's best for everyone. It's best for touch users, for mouse users, for people who don't understand the icon, things like that. So the thing is, we've been relying a lot on mouse and hover effect when designing. It's been kind of the default stuff. I don't know what to do with this information. I'm going to hide it under a hover. The problem is, today we have a lot of touch devices, not only mobile, but tablets, hybrid devices, things like that. So we really need to think beyond this kind of everyone uses a mouse thing. Then in the end, what helps me kind of bridge the gap with the development team between the kind of super static images and the complex components is three things. Task flow, which is kind of an abstract representation of how this interface is going to work from like the beginning of the task to the end. Usually I do that at the beginning, even before doing wireframes, because it also helps me project on what kind of pages do I need, what kind of interaction do I need to build. And then screen flow is something I usually build more at the end of the project. It's kind of the same thing as task flow, but you see that you have directly, so this is mobile one, you directly have all of the mobile mockups, and on top of that, you have all of those little links. So this is really to help my dev team understand, what's happening, what happens when you click here and here and here. Because again, we're designing in static tools, and we have to find some way of communicating to the dev team how it's supposed to behave. and then show don't tell. So I usually do some kind of prototypes for usability testing, and this is done in Axure, but you can use whatever prototyping tool you like. And I usually attach those to the driver ticket because it helps me, like, again, communicate how it's going to interact, but also I can communicate the different types of interaction and animation with that. Then the next things that comes to mind when dealing with what happens in real life is, okay, what happens with actual real browsers, like different browsers, different sizes, different things like tablets, desktop, and everything in between. And the not fun truth is our design tools still force us to design static picture of what the product will look like. And we're kind of cheating as designers to try to compensate that constraint. So usually designers will start one version of the component page. And usually, let's face it, even if we all talk about mobile first as a philosophy and a way of building, most of us will start designing for the kind of desktop case scenario, whether it's pages or components. And then we say, okay, we need to provide a mobile version at some point to the dev team. So let's design the same one with mobile version. And then they'll implement it. It's like, okay, mobile version, desktop version, good, all done, perfect, right? Well, until you have those kind of in-betweens. And then usually you end up with something like, oh crap, it's stretched. So it's kind of not completely horrible because this is a pizza picture. Imagine those were kind of people here with the stretching of the image. We might have cut quite a few heads, which is not a good thing you want to have like on a news website or something. So maybe at some point I need more. Maybe I need to think about those in between. So I end up like having more and more version of the same component. And then you're like, okay, we can use the small version on mobile and small screens. And then we have kind of the medium version for a little bit bigger viewports and like the large version for even bigger viewports, like big tablets. And then on desktop or like super big tablets, we switch to that kind of large version. So again, design tool, they're trying to get a little bit more flexible. So here on the left, you have a demo of Figma's, what's the name of this? Constraints. So with constraints, you can actually build components that you can stretch. So it's really interesting because you can quickly build responsive components. But at the end of the day, you are going to export, again, like static mockups. So you will still put those components in kind of arbitrary screen size to communicate with developer. And it's the same for Axure and all of those tools. You have like portrait iPhone, portrait tablet, display, stuff like that. So we are still kind of designing those images, but we just design them in different ways to kind of communicate the responsiveness. So how can we build flexible product from ideal pixel perfection condition in design tool to the browser? Jen Simon had a really interesting talk at an event apart 2018, which is called Intrinsic Web Design. And I really encourage you to watch this talk. It's an amazing talk. So intrinsic web design, someone kind of summarized it that way. Instead of changing styles based on the size of a viewport or how big the screen of the device is, components automatically lay themselves out based on their own ideal condition. I'm gonna let that sink in. So, okay. It means that today we have the technology to build those flexible components that are able to have this kind of automatic layout based on different criteria. We have Flexbox, we have grid layout, we have Clump, we have media query, we have a lot of different things. And you can even build like responsive component without media query. So I can imagine components that are not just adapting to the viewport size, which you can do with media query, but they just like lay themselves out based on the container size. And I was wondering if we could do this for my pizza component, and Geoffrey had a lot of fun with it. And this is what it looks like. Containers, and there's not a single media query used here. It's just a smart mix of Flexbox and Clump and a lot of different like max width, min width thing. So the idea is that today we have the technology in the browser to build a component on the left part of the screen without even needing media query or something like that. But if you want the components to adapt in more complex way, like if you want, for instance, like I have on the right side here, to hide or display the metadata, or if you want to move the button from the bottom of the card to having it on top of directly the image, you need something more. You need something that is called container query, and that we've been asking for a while now. And they're coming to the browser finally. So the idea of container query is that instead of checking for a viewport size, you are actually going to check for a parent or a container size, and you will be able to adapt accordingly. And this is going to be a really, really interesting piece of technology, because it means that we will be able to build super flexible components that will be able to adapt to a lot of different sizes, whether it's container or viewport size. And so it's changing a lot the way I'm designing. It means that as a designer, my job is to show my developers those kind of ideal conditions, those kind of static mockups, and then we leave the precise implementation to the browser. But it needs letting go. We need to stop obsessing over pixel perfection, like, okay, design all of those different things, and kind of start embracing the fluid, flexible nature of the web, which would mean that we could design some ideal condition of the components or the page in the tools, like Sketch, Figma, whatever. And then we decide in the browser how it's going to look like and how it's going to behave. So we thought about technical states, different browsers. What about designing for different user situation? For instance, dark mode is a big trend at the moment, but some users might not like dark mode at all. So in browsers, but also at OS level, you can have this kind of preferences. You can say, I prefer to have a light theme, a dark theme, or I want to follow the device theme, which is nice because, for instance, I can't read in dark mode. So most of the time I say, I still want the content to be in light mode, even if my phone becomes dark mode. And you can query for that. There's a media query called prefers color scheme. And according to that, you can kind of query what's the user preference here and adapt the website to that. Then about animations, like some animation can make you user sick, like nausea, headaches, things like that. Especially people with vestibular disorders, like when there's stuff moving around. For me, it's whether it's on a website or in a video game, I get super sick, and it's really, really not fun, because it's the same way as when you're in a car, someone is driving and you're reading something. A lot of people can't do that because then things move around your head and you get nauseous. So that's the exact same thing, but when I use websites, which is cool. So there's a system preferences on Mac and Windows where you can say, I don't want to have that many things moving around, so I want the motion to be reduced. And you can query for that in CSS. The media query prefers reduced motion, lets you do that. So it doesn't mean that for accessibility purpose, you need to remove all the animations. So here what I did is like, I removed the shooting star on the reduced motion because it's annoying. And I also like switch moving left and right hover for something more smooth that is a simple like fade in, fade out. And there's more. There's a lot of new media query level 5 that are coming that kind of check for those kind of accessibility user preferences. So at the moment, it's a specification. It's still a work in progress. Syntax might change. Even specs like that might change. But at some point, you'll be able to kind of really adapt to different accessibility options from the user. Then you could imagine adapting your interface to the environment. Why not? Like using different light sensors. So the demo on the left was done by Mandy Michael, and I'm basically like putting some a lamp next to the light sensor of my phone, and you see that it's brightening and getting less bright. So it means that we can have this kind of stuff on the web as well. And if you think about a GPS app like Waze, they're able to detect that you're in a tunnel by using the light sensor, because usually in tunnels the car becomes dark all of a sudden, and the GPS. And then they will just like switch the GPS in dark mode based on those two data. So it's interesting to have this kind of adaptive feature. Just make sure, again, that at some point users have the control. If they don't want those features, just let them override them and say, I don't want to use that. Stop taking control of my phone. So it's always kind of a balance, like doing stuff regarding environment versus giving user the final say and the final control. Then when you talk about an environment, we could imagine building component and product with offline support in mind. even for the web, we have APIs and stuff for that now. I think you'll hear a lot about that during Project Fugu. So Sarah Sweden, for instance, they have she has this website where you can save the page for later. And if you come back, you can read all the pages that you saved for later, even if you don't have any data or connection. Financial Times Week, they have this kind of way of caching today's edition. So I could like open the website today, and then if I go to public transportation in a metro where I have crappy connection or in a plane, I can still read everything that was cached for today's edition. So we can do a lot of interesting stuff with that as well to adapt to a kind of user environment. And another way to deal with connection loss in native app is to have some synchronization in the background. And again, there's going to be an API for that for the web, which is kind of a good news. So if you think about designing for synchronization in the background, it means that now I have some use case and some new things to design. So I kind of maybe need a message to say, oh, you're offline, your email will be sent once you are online again, something like that. And then at component level, I might need some new states, like, okay, we still have this ideal default state, everything is fine. We might have kind of this synchronization failed state. We have a synchronization state, like this content is currently synchronizing, and we might have a synchronization success state. And maybe at some point, the synchronization success disappears and it goes back to ideal state because everything is back to normal or something like that. So again, a lot of new things I need to think about as a designer. And then we could imagine designing for different network conditions, like native app do that a lot already. Like if you're on Netflix and you wonder why all of a sudden the things you're watching becomes all blurry, it's because Netflix detected that there was kind of a change in your connection. Maybe all of a sudden you lost some stuff, or like the ping became higher, something like that. And they switched the quality of the video, and then it comes back to normal all of a sudden. And we could imagine doing that as well on the web, like maybe not loading a decorative image for a blog, because yeah, if the connection is low, people are coming for the list of links, not the really nice image. So maybe give them what they're interested into instead of having this super long, it's not that long, but like this decorative image loading. If you are like working on something that does video calls, maybe you want to have this kind of little message to inform users, look, we detected that your connection is slow and we recommend that you turn off the camera so that you can still keep kind of a good edge quality for the call, something like that. So possibilities are quite interesting, but yeah, we need to prepare the design for that as well. So to design for different user situations, what we need to do is really to understand how people really use the apps in the website. And it's usually going beyond what happens while they are in the app. It's really trying to understand what's happening around, like the whole ecosystem, and thinking about the whole journey of, okay, at some point they might have my website or my app in their hand, but things are happening around all of that. And there's a UX method to help us with that, which is usually like doing a lot of user research to really understand the environment, and building user journey map, which is the kind of thing on the right. Then as designers, developers, project owners, as human beings, we bring our own biases and assumptions to the things we build. And yes, it's hard to go beyond those, beyond this kind of happy path. So here's just kind of a few examples of assumption and of questions I want to leave you with and kind of think about going beyond that. So when designing forms, or usually whenever we ask data from our users, we already come with a lot of assumption. Let's talk about asking gender, for example. Why do we ask for gender in the first place? Maybe an interesting question. And if the answer is marketing segmentation, please just don't. But there might be legit reasons. Like I was talking to Conference on Grenadian, and they said we are asking for the gender because we want to keep track of the diversity of the participants. And if you want to keep track of that, you need some data. So you need to ask at some point. So if you're asking, maybe explain why you're asking, what you're going to do with the data. And then if you need it, make sure it's private and safe and anonymous. And then another question is, am I asking the right way? Like if the question is, I'm asking gender because I want to know if I need to say he, she, they, to my user, maybe ask for the pronouns instead. If the question is asked because, and this happens a lot in insurance and things like, oh, I really need to know if I need to start this email or this paper mail by dear Miss or dear Mrs. because bank insurances, maybe ask again what user prefers. I really don't mind if like my bank or insurance sends me email starting with dear Stephanie Walter. I don't care if they call me Miss or not, but that's my personal preference. So it depends on your users. And this is also true for user research. Like when you're doing user research, when you're building surveys, for instance, you might bring your own biases in the data and in the question you're asking. Like I have an insurance for my house, and they sent me this survey, and there were a lot of questions about insurance. And one of the questions was, when you are subscribing for a car insurance, you prefer da 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 da. I don't have a car. I don't even have a driving license. And the question was mandatory. So I was like, what am I supposed to do with that? Do I lie or something? And the people who build this form, they just like assume that everyone at some point is going to have a car, going to buy a car, and going to need a car insurance, which might be true for a big part of the population, especially in Luxembourg. But still, and the reason why is those people were biased because they're selling insurance, including car insurances. So I kind of understand where this comes from. So this is what I'm saying, like, check for your biases and why do we ask this? And maybe if there's a chance that people might not fall into that category, don't ask, or at least don't make it mandatory. Then is my default the right assumption for everyone? For example, a weight tracking app, they tend to assume that you want to lose weight and congratulate their users on that. Like, yay, congratulations, you lost 2 kilograms in the last month. That works, except for people who actually track their weight because they're sick. And for those people, losing weight might not be a thing that you want to congratulate them about, because maybe the disease is progressing, so it's actually a bad sign or something like that. So again, what you can do about that is don't assume, ask people clearly how they want to use your app, your product, and make sure you kind of customize this based on those needs. And Cassie Evans, she's an amazing speaker. She speaks a lot about SVG and everything around that. And she had an interesting tweet this year that was about algorithmically generated memories. She explained that Spotify year in music nearly broke her because the song she most played that year was the one she played to her nan when she was passing. And that's actually quite sad because, yeah, sometimes we assume the things that we create might bring this kind of good memories, but sometimes they might trigger the opposite. So there's not a lot of way to deal with that, and it might happen for some users. Like today you have Eric as a speaker, and he wrote a book with Sarah where he talks a lot about these kind of things. And I don't want to enter into detail of his life, but maybe he'll talk about that a little bit, about how something that were supposed to bring great memories, actually something bad happened last year. If it brings those kind of memory back, it's not a good thing. So there's not a lot of things you can do about that, about not bringing bad memories. You just need to know that assumption based on quantitative data can be super, super, super tricky. So be careful with those. And then it gets worse when we put validation gate on top of wrong assumptions. Like our industry is so obsessed with name validation, then some people were forced to remind to the coworker that the name of the VPE is Lee, 2 characters, to have this kind of arbitrary limit of a name must have 3 characters removed, which is just out of complete nowhere usually. So be careful about assumption, especially if you're going to put validation on top of those. And then another question is this going to stress or irritate some users? And notification, like push notification, is a good example of those. If you are building something that might interrupt user and bring their attention back to your app or something, make sure you build those the right way. Like, I don't know why Amazon has decided that maybe I'm in a demographic that buys some does some Gummistiefeln, but like for a week they were sending those push notification like, do you want a blue one, a yellow one? What about the green one, the red one, and all of that? And they were just like interrupting me with this notification out of nowhere. And like my bank sent me this push notification that was basically, hey, you haven't opened the app in a while. There's new features. Wanna come and take a look? Like, no thanks. This is how you get like user remove the access to the notification. But again, push notification is an interesting thing. It might be super useful as a feature. Just make sure that when you are designing those, you give control to the users and you understand the whole kind of global picture. And then how might this get to be used is another question you might want to ask. At the moment, everyone is switching from WhatsApp to Telegram or Signal. And when I installed the app, I started getting this join Telegram, and it created this new conversation empty, which is kind of the saddest thing ever. I kind of feel now I have to talk to those people. But my problem with that is the question behind this, which is, did they also notify like everyone that has my phone number that I am using Telegram? And when I shared that on social media, I had a lot of people raise concern. Like someone said, I have an ex stalking me and I keep their number in my phone because I don't want to fall in the trap of, hey, how are you? Who are you again? Oh crap, it's that ex. So she keeps this guy's phone number somewhere just to avoid that. But then she's wondering, like, did he get notified that she's using the service? And someone said, yeah, I got abusive family members, and they keep trying to contact me, and there's no way to set up a whole block list on those. And someone said, yeah, I saw notification of people I blocked on my phone here and things like that. So a lot of kind of concern. And here again, what you could do about that is maybe ask the user before doing this kind of stuff. Like I would totally see Telegram have kind of a model during onboarding, say, okay, can I notify people that you are joined Telegram? Or even better, do you want to cherry pick the people from your contact address book that's, and we only notify those, something like that. So there's kind of solution to this kind of problem to avoid something getting abused or just getting completely creepy. But then it comes down to taking a decision between kind of growing the product with more users versus kind of privacy settings and things like that. So there's a few tools that can help you go beyond this kind of assumption and start thinking beyond this happy path. I really like the abusability test website. They list example of different area of technology that might go wrong, like user account, forums, stuff like that. And they also tell you how you might mitigate those risks. Then there's something called the bad actor brainstorming session. So the idea behind that is that you are going to invite some people in a workshop, and usually you want like people from security, risk management, UX designers, and like everyone who has kind of who is relevant in certain of those areas. And you give them roles and ask them, okay, some people might abuse our system. Like, can you imagine how those people might abuse the system? And what we can do to avoid that, like creepy ex-stalker, foreign hacker, people who want to steal data, things like that. So the idea behind that is act instead of react. Try to imagine what might go wrong, and again, put some safeguards to avoid that instead of waiting for something to go wrong and then being in this kind of reaction mode and in a rush or something. So there's plenty of resources. I will create a transcript of this talk. It will be on our website, and I will post all of those resources. Don't worry, you'll have all the links in it. Yeah, you have all those frameworks like Ethical OS, Toolkit, Human by Design that can really help you go beyond this kind of assumption. So if you want to challenge your assumption, one of the best ideas, of course, build more diverse teams. If you have different people who have experienced the world in different ways in your team, you might be able to get more inputs about what might go wrong or how might people actually use these things and things like that. Then you also need to deeply understand your user needs and behavior. It means doing user research. And when I'm saying users, I'm saying understanding all of them, not just the ones looking and acting like you. Like sometimes when you talk about the user to stakeholders or people like that, they kind of only imagine the user that will use this the same way they would do. But this is just yet kind of another bias that we need to go beyond, and usually you need user research to kind of go beyond this kind of assumptions. So in the end, and I'm going to quote Laura Klein, who's an amazing UX designer on that, it all comes down to the balance of building the right thing versus building the thing right. Building the thing right was kind of the first part of the talk. It's about making sure you don't forget about different processes, different cases, different states, what happened with data connection and errors and things like that, things that we usually dismissed as kind of these edge cases. Building the thing right is about building something that is based on a true and deeply understanding of real user need, real user goal, and designing products and services with those needs in mind. And I think we can have both. Like, we can build and design the right thing the right way together as a team. Thank you.